look at our faces for the entire hour, but we will just say hi, and we wanted to show you out the window that Atlanta uncharacteristically has some snow. It has about this much snow on the ground, and it fell, I think, on Thursday or Friday, and then we came in after they had done the plowing and taken care of it. So there's a little bit of a holiday feel, a Christmas feel in the air with snow on the ground. That helps contribute to the mood.
Okay, so it is now 3 p.m. in Geneva and morning in Atlanta.
Great.
So Dale, over to you.
Okay, great. So hello, everybody. It's Carolina and John and Dale here in Atlanta. So I'm going to be presenting from my computer, but we just wanted to show you our smiling faces. And we can show you, how well will it show up? That outside there is a very little bit of snow on the ground. Not a lot of snow, but a little bit of snow for some winter feel. So now we'll switch to the screen. We're happy to be talking with you today in what is, I think, the third of these Monday presentations. I don't know how you all will entertain yourselves on Mondays after the course finishes, but it's been nice to have a little bit of extended time and to break out of the format of the 6-minute video or 7 or 8-minute video to talk about these topics. So we had John 2 weeks ago talking about weights. Carolina last week gave us an overview of some of the more advanced coverage indicators. And today we're going to be talking about the program called VCQI that we've mentioned in various contexts, and in particular we've given you some pointers to some documents, some of the VCQI documentation, because it's where we are writing down sort of WHO's current definitions of indicators and our first thoughts about how to interpret these things. So you are the first big audience to look at some of these documents, so we'll welcome your feedback. I'm sure that some things could be expressed in a clearer manner, so when you don't have the pressure of time, if you want to give us some feedback, when my wife is giving me feedback, she tells me that feedback is a gift, and so we'll appreciate having some feedback from you on the documents. But today we're going to talk about a set of programs which together we call the Vaccination Coverage Quality Indicators, or VCQI. So just to start with the big picture of where we are, you know, for the analysts in your creator project, you've been planning the analysis. So this slide and the next is an overview of everything in this course. So planning the analysis is important. I have it listed at the left here because really it should begin at the same time that you start planning the survey or thinking about the survey. What are we doing this survey for? What are we going to report? And then we talked, and VCQI helps with a few things in this panel. It helps you think about table shells and figure templates, and it helps you perhaps think about making sure you ask all the right questions in the survey so that you can then calculate the indicators you want to report. And for analysts, our first exercise was about cleaning the data, and we've developed a program to help, a Stata program to help with that, a cert list. Some of you have downloaded it and tried it. Some of you will have a chance to do that again when you have a little bit of leisure time. It'll be available, of course, after the course finishes, and we'll be happy to hear feedback about that as well. John spoke about weighting the data and all of these steps. We don't currently have a WHO template for calculating survey weights, so maybe we'll develop one, but Bo has developed a terrific one for mix, and John has shared that. We can share it again if you've missed it. That's helpful. That could be adapted for an EPI coverage survey, and maybe WHO will develop a template for weighting. We understand that weighting is a topic that's new to a lot of you and that you want to understand clearly, and so we're trying to figure out how to provide materials to help you with weighting. And then today we're talking about, after you've cleaned that data set and attached weights to it, conducting the analysis. So these are the steps that I think of for conducting analysis. We're going to describe the sample, calculate derived variables. We have survey variables, but those don't tell us coverage. We have to combine them together and calculate some derived and indicator variables. And then populate those tables and figures that you designed early in the process. And then as the analyst, we contribute some text for the survey report, for the methods section, the strengths section, the limitation section. and assist with interpretation, and then we deliver to the team and to the sponsor, to whoever's going to archive the material, and to whoever will probably be involved with the next survey, let's say in 1 or 2 or 3 years. We deliver the data sets and the code. Vicky does steps 1 through 3 on this slide, and the materials that we've developed to go along with Vicky are meant to help you with steps 5 and 6 as well. So I want to motivate what led us to develop Vicky. When you analyze your first coverage survey, it's super fun, and you develop these things from scratch, and you develop a lot of, many hundreds of lines of code, and everything is great. And then if it goes well, then someone asks you to do a second survey. And the logical thing to do is to take the code from the first survey and try to reuse the parts of it that you're particularly proud of. But when you analyze it on a one-off basis like that, you wind up combining, tangling together information about this survey, information about this country, very specific information, along with the generic parts of the code that calculate the indicators and put them in tables and make figures. At least I did. Maybe other people are more organized from the start. But the first time through, I didn't know there was going to be a second one, so everything was mishmashed together. And then when I did the second one, it was complicated and tricky to take things out. This is the common situation where you have a survey data set, and then you have some programs, but those programs also contain a lot of the specifics for this particular project. And then those programs, they make some outputs. They make some analysis data sets with derived variables, and they might make some intermediate format. But then usually you, the analyst, are stuck with doing some work by hand to take the intermediate format and to make tables and figures. It's not always done in Excel, but it's often done in Excel, and it's not always done by hand, but I would say in 90% of the cases it's done by hand, that the results are formatted. There are steps that happen here by hand. Now for this person, this can be a maddening job, because you often don't do it just once, because at some point your good friend or your former friend, the data manager, comes to you and says, oh, we found some issues, we have cleaned the data again, and so here we're providing you a cleaner or an updated, or maybe you find some issues late in the process. They come to you and say, we've updated the data again, can you recreate the tables and recreate the figures? Well, you have to run your code again, and then you have to do those sometimes hours and hours of work by hand again. So let's talk for a minute about this information that's tangled together. Some of the information that changes as you go from one survey to the next. These are the things that are going to be different and that we want to separate out. I think that's part of the vision of Vicky. So when you go to your second survey, the vaccination schedule in that second country, well, it will be a different list of doses, and maybe the schedule will be different. And of course, the strata will be different because you're in a different country. In the levels and the names and the order that you want to show things in tables, those will all be different. Maybe your second or third survey will be looking at respondents who are of a different age. Instead of just 12 to 23 months, it'll include everyone in the first and second year of life, or second and third year of life, or maybe it's some other age range. And then the very specific details of the survey will differ. In some surveys, we also visit health facilities to look for evidence of vaccination. In some surveys, we record whether the child had a BCG scar on their arm. For some post-campaign surveys, we record whether there were finger marks or not. And then these details are enrolled, they are incorporated in the indicators. So the code to calculate coverage, it's a little bit different if you do these things or if you don't do these things. So those are some specifics about the survey and about the country context. And now, the next slide are some differences, some things that might vary just even within a single survey from analysis to analysis. Some days we're focused on making tables that summarize all of the doses, and some days we're going to run an analysis that looks at a smaller list of doses. Some days we're going to calculate the full set of indicators. Some days we're very focused on a subset. And then there are options for different indicators. We've been corresponding among the analysts a little bit last week. Well, what do we mean when we say fully vaccinated? It seems like a very simple term, You stop a person on the street, ask, tell them for 30 seconds what you're doing and ask them what you think it means for the child to be fully vaccinated. Well, it probably means that they've had all the doses that they're supposed to have. But it turns out that the definition of fully vaccinated is sometimes a controversial thing, or we want to do some sensitivity analysis around that. So some of the options might change, and then on some days you're focused on tables, other days you're focused on figures, sometimes you want to make results to share, things like that. And then we've also been talking a little bit in the week 3 videos about how are we going to calculate these confidence intervals. So these are some details that are all mixed up in the code when we have the common situation. So I want to having taken that time to set it up, oh yes, and then there's this point. By the time we get to the analysis, our brothers and sisters who were responsible for the earlier portions of the survey, they have gone over budget and over time. So now the project is late, the minister is impatient, and there's not as much money as we thought there would be at the end. And so sometimes this code is not tested as well as we know it should be because there's time pressure and because things keep changing. So the vision in developing Wiki was to separate the programs that we use and all the information that's specific to the survey and specific to the analysis. And we do that by, we keep the survey data over on the left, and then we have literally just one program, one Stata program that holds all the survey specific information and all the analysis specific information. So in Wiki, as an analyst, you you assemble your data sets, and that's a big job, and then you edit only one program that holds anything that's specific to this project. We call that a control program. The control program calls other programs, more than 200 of them, in our Wiki software library. And the Wiki software library is very intentionally separated from any details about your survey. It doesn't know or care where you're doing the survey. And it's very generic. It has some hooks for the different sources of vaccination evidence and things like that, but it's quite generic, and it can handle details from any reasonable combination of inputs. So because we're using the same programs over and over again, we have the luxury of a little more time to document those programs and to test those programs. So that's a good thing. And we share them, and anyone can change them, can extend them, can add additional indicators, or can change some features about them, can change the labels on the figures or things like that. And then those programs create outputs, and you can see here there's no crazy looking guy over on the right who's been up until 3 a.m. formatting Excel sheets time and time again, because Wiki produces the output and it formats the tables and figures, and you can do some additional formatting to them when they're finished if you want to. You may choose not to use them exactly as they are produced, but they are in usable or a very nearly usable format but when they're produced. So this is the vision, primarily to separate out the specific details and then to have a library of code that we really feel good about because we've designed it from the ground up, we've documented it, and we've tested it time and time again. And because anyone else can test it, you don't have to take my word for it. You can download it and test it and lift the hood and see what's going on inside. That's the vision for Wiki. So at this stage of time, Wiki is a set of more than 200 Stata commands, Stata programs, but you don't have to learn 200 new Stata commands. You only have to edit one control program. And we have a user's guide to help you learn how to do that. We have defined some formats for input data sets, and we have defined some formats, some specific syntax for how do you describe a vaccination schedule, how do you describe the characteristics of your survey, and how do you tell Wiki which analyses you would like her to produce today. We've done a lot of testing of Wiki. We feel good about the fact that it's doing what we think that it's doing. We're always happy to have additional eyes on the product and project. But we've done a lot of testing, and we've run it successfully over and over again on various EPI surveys. And then as Bo was suggesting last week, presciently, Bo was suggesting, hey, it'd be great to have a converter so we can run it on DHS and mix. And we've done that as well. So we've converted some DHS data sets and some mixed data sets into Wiki-compatible format, and we run them through, and we have very closely reproduced the results in the DHS-MX reports, and in the cases where they don't agree, we drill down and understand why. And we're happy to talk more about that. Wiki has a library of more than 20 indicators at the moment, and it's extensible. We can add more whenever there's time and interest and money. At the moment, it has the most indicators for routine immunization, so there are 18 different things that it can calculate about a routine immunization survey. There's just one thing it calculates about tetanus protection at birth surveys, and then several things about post-campaign surveys. And then it has some indicators for describing the data set, describing the responses to multiple choice questions, and for calculating with whether there's a statistically significant difference in coverage between different strata. So you can comment on Wiki. Of course, you can comment through the Scholar infrastructure. You can also join the community of Wiki users by going over to the TechNet 21 website. And there you can join a Wiki users group. And when we update the documentation or the programs, or when we make new instructional videos, that's the outlet through which they are distributed to the public there. So I have some additional slides, but why don't we stop, Rada? I've not been watching the chat window. You can let me know if there are any pithy questions, and maybe John, no, Carolina says we're good. So we'll just stop and give people an opportunity to type a question into the chat if you'd like to at this point.
Yeah, no questions so far, Dale. But maybe if we take, as you suggest,
we'll take a breath. I'll have a sip of water, and let's see if anybody.
And I've just posted into the chat the link to the Wiki group. So it is, you do need to ask to request to join the group. But if you have an interest in this, and if you're here, you probably do. You're strongly encouraged to join first TechNet. That's step one, and then step two is joining the specific Wiki group.
Yes, we thought of making a Wiki, Rada. That's on our list of things to do, just because it's fun to say.
Yep. Yeah, Simon, I've come to know over the previous weeks that your hand is raised either due to a technical glitch, but yes, if you do wish to speak, let me know in the chat.
Hi, Bo. The quick list of the indicators is in that quick reference guide that maybe that was circulated only to the analysts. So we'll post that today, or I'll also try to remember to email it to you after the chat. So there's a list of, yes, so there is a quick list. There's a list if it's in a page, and then there's a short list that describes the indicator and denominator for each one. Okay, I'll make sure you've got all the documents, Bo, after the call.
And I've just pasted the
holy
link
smokes, you're fast. Right, it's very fast. Okay, so there's the link. And if you go and join the users group, then you always have access to the latest version. Balram Bui is asking, is there a plan to develop a program in EpiInfo? So, we are sitting in Atlanta today, and we have a meeting later this week with the people who develop EpiInfo. And I want to, pardon me, I didn't mean to hit the mic. I want to talk with them about how they calculate their confidence intervals, and we could develop a set of instructions for doing a Wiki analysis in EpiInfo. It would take some resources to do that, and it might take a few enhancements to EpiInfo. So we would need to find a sponsor. WHO would need to know that there's a ton of demand for that, but I don't see a big technical barrier because all the steps are there. EpiInfo can calculate new variables, so if you had the right instructions, or you can also provide EpiInfo syntax. I think it is doable, Balram. So it has to do with time and money. Is that what you're saying? Oh yeah, and R. People are asking about R as well, which is also, so both of which are free. EpiInfo and R are free to run Wiki, as I'm going to say in a moment, and I've said several times, you have to have a license for Stata. Stata's not free. And so, so in the glorious future, there may very well be a free version of Wiki that runs using one of these free tools. Today, Vicky is a data-related tool. Okay, I'm closing my eyes on the chat, and I'm going to continue. I also put my clock out of view, so okay, but we're good for now. Vicky's based on some documents. There's the list of sort of WHO standard survey forms and questions, and then we've added to that some variable names and recommendations for how to code those variables. If you either collect your data in that format from the very start, or if you do some data management to put your survey data in the format of using those variables and codings, then your data set will be Vicky compatible and you can run it through the software. And then we also have written down for each indicator, step by step by step, how do you go from the survey variables to calculating the derived variables and the outcome variables, so that at least everything is written down, and the code we think matches the specifications. The code matches what we've written down. In some cases because we wrote the specification first, and in some cases because we wrote the specification by looking at the code. So, but either way, we think it's pretty good. And then we also have written down for each indicator, how do we calculate it? Is it weighted? Does it have uncertainty? Do we report uncertainty associated with it? Things like that. So there are documents that underlie Vicky. So if you want to do a Vicky analysis, as a user, you have to bring some things to the party. You have to bring the survey data, and it has to be converted to be in Vicky compatible format, but there's a document that helps with that, and we can help with that as well. You have to calculate the survey weights outside of Vicky. Weights are it's not rocket science, but it's complex, and there are some things that are specific on a survey by survey basis, especially about the different stages and things like that. So Vicky doesn't even try to calculate the weights. You have to calculate those and put those on the data set. And then of course you have to bring the information about what is the vaccination schedule, what did you do and did you not do in your survey, and what do you want to analyze today. And then Vicky produces these things. First of all, it gives you what we call an augmented data set. It gives you back the survey, a data set that has all the survey variables in it, and then that has also all of the derived variables and the indicator variables in it. So if you want to audit Vicky, if you are suspicious, skeptical, mistrustful person like I am, and you don't believe that other people may have done the work clearly or correctly, well then you can look at the augmented data set and you can follow the steps again yourself. Or you could try to program the steps in another language. You could try to program the steps in EpiInfo, and you could compare your results to Vicky's results. Vicky also produces a data set that just contains the results, not in a formatted table or a graphic. Carolina has a point to make.
There's a question from Sarah about installing asserts.
Okay, that's not what we're talking about today. So I'm happy to help you with that offline, with the cert list offline. Yep. And then Vicky makes some formatted tables and some graphical figures also. And Vicky has flexibility along several different dimensions. So one dimension that it has flexibility on is the strata. So we can use Vicky to handle a survey from a single stratum. We can go to our file cabinet and pull out some results from a classic 30x7 survey, perfectly valid thing to do. We can put them in Vicky compatible format, and we can produce Vicky results for a standard single stratum survey. It wouldn't have to be 30x7, but we can certainly reanalyze any old 30x7 surveys using Vicky. But then Vicky can also handle data from several strata. And the survey that we recently finished in Burkina Faso, we had 63 strata. So there are 63 health districts. They were nested in 13 administrative regions. You can see the map over there on the right. That's no problem to have 3 levels of nested geography. We had the same thing recently in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we had the states were the strata, and then the zones. And states are nested within zones, and then, of course, the zones are nested within the country. And then, in addition to the 3 levels of geographic strata, you can make tables and figures that include demographic subgroups, and I'll show those in a moment. And then Vicky knows, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, a lot about routine immunization surveys, tetanus protection at birth surveys, and post-campaign surveys. So these are a couple of dimensions along which Vicky is flexible. We've been saying Vicky is a Stata resource. It requires Stata version 14 or later. And then when it produces the tables, it produces them in .xlsx, so in Microsoft Excel format. So you either need Microsoft Excel or you need a free program that will read an Excel spreadsheet in order to look at the tables. So we want everyone that's in the Survey Scholar course to have a working understanding of what Vicky is and what it can do. And both the survey managers and the survey analysts have been looking at some output that's either directly out of Vicky or has been sort of reformatted from Vicky. But we want you to feel comfortable that you could define various indicators, that you'd know what document to go to in order to interpret the output. But many people who work hard on vaccination coverage surveys will not run Vicky. It runs within Stata. Stata is a program that's used by statisticians. Only statisticians usually have licenses for Stata. And the analysis of this kind of data from a complex survey sample like this needs to be done by a statistician or under the guidance of a statistician. Now, you don't have to be an advanced Stata programmer to use Vicky, but you do have to be comfortable in Stata. You have to be comfortable modifying a Stata program and according to some instructions. So if you're someone who works with survey analysis plans a lot, if you work with data sets, you're super comfortable renaming and recoding variables and merging and dividing data sets and analyzing data with statistical software, then I would say that you're a good candidate to run Vicky. And if these things are not part of your normal job, then it's not that you wouldn't be associated with Vicky. You might make the request for a Vicky analysis, but you would probably make that request from a colleague who fits the description in the first bullet here. The resources that are available to you are the 220 or so programs that make up Vicky. We have some example data sets and control programs, so you can see, you can reproduce output that we've generated to make sure that your installation is working correctly. And then there are at least 4 helpful documents at the moment. There's a user's guide. There's the document that lists the questions and the variable names and the coding for how to make the dataset Vicky compatible. We call that the forms and variable list document. For those people who are interested in the details of how the indicators are calculated, there's a detailed document about that. And then for those people who just want to interpret output and they don't care how it was calculated, we have a quick reference guide that has a short, a half page on each indicator defining the numerator, denominator, etc. If you're a Stata beginner, you can do a lot of things that are super helpful. You can do all the main things that we intend to do with Stata. With Vicky, you can run it, and then you can copy and paste the tables and figures into your report or presentation. And if you wanted to reformat those tables, that's no problem, because you have skills in Excel or you have skills in Word, and you could reformat the tables if you wanted to change something about them. If your Stata skills are a little more advanced, then you can use Stata's graph editor, and you could change some things about the figures. You could edit the figures in the graph editor. Or you could take the database of stored results, and you might say, I don't want to see an inchworm plot. I love bar plots. I want to make a bar plot. And so you could use the database of stored results, and you could make your own figures or your own tables using the results that Vicky has calculated, but formatted in the way that's specific for your project, that includes or excludes information that in a way that's a little different than the way Vicky does it. And then if you have advanced skills in Stata, then first of all, you might be interested in taking that augmented data set and you might say, thank you, Vicky, for making all these standard descriptive tables and figures, but now I want to do some analysis. I want to do some logistic regression and see what socioeconomic, demographic variables are correlated with the likelihood of being fully vaccinated or the likelihood of dropout or things like that. So Vicky has saved you a lot of time by making all the standard descriptive tables, which from an analysis standpoint, they're not simple to make because there are a lot of details to pay attention to, but it's just descriptive statistics. It's not analytically very complicated. So, and it delivers to you this nice augmented data set, which is then all ready for the advanced analyses. And I'll just give credit. I don't know if David Kofi is on the call today, but the idea for the augmented data set came in a meeting from that Burkina Faso survey with David and some other colleagues in Burkina Faso saying, thank you, Vicky, for the tables, but now I want to do some more. Can you give me the data set with everything, with the survey data and the augmented data sets and the derived variables? So that was a great idea. And then, as I said before, if you want to audit the Vicky results, that's fine. You can use the augmented data set to audit the Vicky results. And if you have an idea, as is often the case with smart people like the people on this call, and say, hey, I like this thing that Vicky does, but I would do it a little differently, or I would like to also have an indicator that does this or that. Well, it's quite straightforward to add new indicators to Vicky. All we need is a little time and a little money, but we can add new, and you can do it as well to add new indicators to Vicky. Yeah, so Caroline is reminding me that this is why we want to invite you to join the Vicky community and to have some practice looking at Vicky output, and for some of you to have some practice running Vicky, so that then we can get your good ideas for what should we add and what should we add next, and maybe to have some ideas about who would like to be involved in doing that work. Okay, let's get back to a little bit of eye candy. And we'll talk more about the flexibility. So we talked about flexibility in straight up. Vicky also has tremendous flexibility to design tables with the rows that show up in any order and for any strange subgroup you want to. If you want to show coverage among red-haired, left-handed girls who live in rural villages, then you can set it up so that that goes into every table. So just, you know, these tables, I just snapped these out of Excel, but these look quite a bit like a mixed table because we designed the tables from for the Vicky analysis in Nigeria to look like the mixed. It's okay, Carolina, we'll just let it go. With the help of the mixed team in Nigeria, and we laid out the order of the rows in the way that they wanted the things to appear in the report. So you see here, we have the results for the whole country in the top row, and then we have results broken out by sex, by zone, by state, and then farther down, urban, rural, education, caretakers, age. So there's flexibility. You decide and define what you want to have in the rows, and Vicky can do it. Now, some of these groups might be quite small. The precision might be bad. You can see here that the precision for caretakers who are above the age of 50, this is for crude BCG coverage by card, well, the confidence interval goes from 10% up to 26%. So it's not a precise estimate, but it is the correct estimate. So that's another dimension of flexibility, that you can define and design the tables to look the way you want. And then I'll just quickly give you a taste of the 3 types of graphics that Vicky makes. When we're calculating a weighted outcome, where the results are describing what we infer about coverage in the eligible population, then those are summarized using something we call an inchworm plot. And back in your earlier Scholar updates from last week in the week 3 videos, there's one video in particular that talks about graphical representation of coverage results. We introduced the inchworm plot there. So if you're curious about them, you can go and look at that reasonably short video. So we'll look at some inchworm plots here in just a moment. The second type of figure is when we're looking at unweighted outcomes and we're not necessarily presuming to draw a conclusion that's about the whole population, but we're just describing what we saw in the sample, then we have a figure for those as well. We'll show them. They do not have a fancy name. We call them unweighted proportion plots. And then when we're looking at coverage at the cluster level, what did we see on a cluster by cluster basis? We have, Carolina has last week introduced you to organ pipe plots, and we'll see one example of those as well. And we'll have some of the videos that will be coming out for this week will describe organ pipe plots in more detail. So when you have the results, you've done your Vicky run, you have a folder with tables in it, and you have a folder with figures in it, and you have to decide, am I going to eat the apple and go and look at the tables, or am I going to lick the lollipop and go and look at the eye candy? And personally, I usually start with the plots, but you know, both are important for different reasons and different audiences. Depending on your screen, the details might not be clear here, and we're going to zoom in on different parts of this figure in just a moment. But this is just a big picture showing the coverage results of Penta 3 in the recent Nigeria survey that we've all been talking about. So here we have, this is an inchworm plot. We have the national results in the shaded row, just below center. And then we have the results for each of the 6 regions nested between these lines, and the regions are shown in a slightly darker blue, and their names are in capital letters on the left. And then each of the states that comprise that region are shown nearby. So I like to think of the zone is like the mother hen, and the states are like the little chicks or the little ducklings, and they're all near the mama. They're just a little to the left or the right of the mama. And then, of course, the results aggregated from states. So in the Southwest, the results aggregated from these 6 states, they comprise the results for the Southwest zone. And if we aggregate the results for the 6 zones, they comprise the national results that we see here. So the national results are a weighted average of the 6 zones. Each zone's result is a weighted average of the states that comprise it. And we'll just zoom in. This idea for these zoomed in plots for where we show the results for one zone at a time. This was a great idea that John had earlier this year, that because when everything is together, it can be difficult to see. And in some cases, we're going to make a presentation, maybe just to the states of the North Central Zone. So let's make a plot here. So we're showing here the national results, again in the shaded bar. But now we are just focusing in on what's happening in the North Central Zone. And again, we won't take time to explain the ticks and all the nomenclature on the plots. You can look at the video specifically on graphical representation to learn the details of what these inchworm plots are telling you. But you can tell a lot here. And I will just say that the blob for each stratum, this represents the 95% confidence interval. So you can see where coverage is estimated precisely. The national coverage is estimated quite precisely. It's less precise for the zone, and then even less precise for the states, but even the precision within states varies. So for the state of Niger here, it's narrow, and for Plateau, it's wider. So these these blobs, these inchworms, are showing us something about the precision of our survey estimates. And we have an inchworm plot for each zone. This is an unweighted proportion plot. So here we're not representing the uncertainty, we're just representing the estimated proportion. And estimated proportion is listed on the right, pardon me, along with the sample size. There should be a label at the top here, but I don't have one on this plot. So here, this is dropout from polio 1 to polio 3. In the Northwest zone, again, we see the dropout on a state-by-state basis, and then aggregated up to the zone basis, and then aggregated up to the national basis. So this is for unweighted indicators, and indicators where we're not showing any sampling variability. We're just showing the unweighted sample proportion. And this is another example of an organ pipe plot. Carolina introduced these last week. This is from a recent survey. I took the name off because we haven't discussed the results with the country yet, but this is each column here is a cluster, and this is what proportion of the kids in the survey in that cluster had evidence of receiving their first dose of measles. And so I think there are 24 clusters in this stratum. The width of the cluster is proportional to the sum of the weights in that cluster. So you can see this cluster is contributing far less to the overall coverage estimate than these wider clusters. That's a feature in any weighted survey estimate when the weights vary from cluster to cluster. The overall area that's shaded here in the organ pipe plot, the overall area is exactly equal to the weighted coverage. Again, I didn't list it here. I probably should have listed it, but the coverage in this stratum is equal to the area of this plot that's shaded. And we can see that in many of the clusters, all of the kids in the survey had evidence of receiving the first dose of measles. And then in these clusters out here, less than all of them had evidence of measles. And there's one cluster that's noticeably different than the others, where the coverage is down around 15%. And to drill down into the detail there's an accompanying table. So here's the table that corresponds to that plot. Now in this table, there's a row for each column, and you see that the first rows, they all have 100%, and they're listed in the same order as the columns. And so I want to look and see, pardon me, how many respondents were there in that last column. There were 7 respondents, the table tells me, and the bar height was 14%. So, and it was cluster ID number 125. So I don't know if this is the biggest problem in this stratum. It probably isn't. But one could think about trying to figure out why is this cluster so different than the other clusters here, in that in a random sample of 7 kids, only 1 out of the 7 had and these are all kids who are 12 to 23 months. Yes, Caroline? Yes, so the bars are different sizes because they have the size is proportional to the sum of the weights in that cluster. I want the clusters that have big weight, I want them to be wide. And when we do that, when we make each bar proportional to the sum of the weights, then that means that the overall area, the shaded area, is exactly equal to weighted coverage, the weighted coverage estimate that you would get. Yes. So this, I haven't put a slide in this presentation, but there are a few pieces in Wiki that you can break out and you can use that are not, you wouldn't have to be talking about vaccination. They would still be helpful in any, in some other circumstances. And so organ pipe plots can be helpful in any cluster survey where you have an outcome that is binary, 0 or 1. And it could be health, it wouldn't even have to be health. These plots can give you insight in lots of different surveys. And so there is a do file for creating these, and there's a help file that goes with it, and we'll share that in the course materials. I hadn't thought about breaking that out, but we'll share that. So you can use just that. You don't even have to use the rest of Wiki. And you can use organ pipe plots for any type of cluster survey. And it's helpful. So, you know, the people who are in charge of vaccination for this stratum, they could do some follow-up work. They could send a team out. They could have a focus group. They could look at the map and say, oh, cluster 125, that's in this municipality. We know that they've had serious problems with stockouts. So we understand the problem. We don't have to go and ask questions. Or maybe they say, no, they should have plenty of vaccine. They have a fridge full of vaccine. What's going on? And they could try to follow up and see what's going on there. Yes, it's probably Carolina is reminding me, probably organ pipe plots are super useful when you're looking at post-campaign data, because you can find places where the campaign teams did not get to. I'm just checking the time here. Where they did not get to, and these have been used successfully for that several times now. So there will be a video this week about organ pipe plots, and we will also circulate some information on how to download the program to make them, either for vaccination coverage surveys or other kinds of surveys. So we're nearly at the end of the presentation, and we'll have some time for questions, but I have 2 slides of points that I want you to take away. So Wiki is a set of freely available data programs, and it's designed very specifically to calculate vaccination coverage indicators in documented and reproducible manner. It makes a lot of tables and figures and data sets, and it handles data from 3 different types of coverage survey, and it can handle 3 nested levels of geography plus some demographic subgroups as well. And when it's finished, you can use the tables and figures as is. You can use the data sets that it makes to run some advanced analyses. You can take the results database and make your own tables and figures. You can analyze data from a mix and a DHS from your country if you'd like. So you may have the report with great results for what we would call crude coverage. It might talk about dropout as well, but you might want to calculate some of the additional indicators that Carolina introduced us to last week from a data set that you already have and that's publicly available, and we can help do that. You can contact Carolina about finding some support for that, but we'd be happy to support you in doing additional secondary analysis of those types of data sets. And probably the trickiest thing, it's not rocket science if you're comfortable with data management, but the first hurdle to running Wiki is to take your data set and to make it Wiki compatible. And so we're working on some materials to help you do that, to help make that less mysterious. And if you're comfortable with data management, then it should be straightforward. And I didn't put it on here, but we'll just once again make a plug for the Wiki users group on TechNet, because that has some instructional videos as well and some other resources. So we have a few minutes to discuss questions now. And then later this week, Reda will post an update that has the recording of this session. So you could also post questions there at the bottom of that update. And you know, even if this isn't relevant to you now, it might be relevant in 6 months or 9 months. You come back later, you can send email to me and to Carolina, and we'll try to address your questions. So I'm going to now start looking at my chat window, Reda, and then
yep. All right, so we questions. Yeah, we have a few questions. I think Carolina's been responding
yes.
to some.
And responding. Yep.
We do have Balram Bui who says, what kind of caution do we need to flag? In my analysis for Nigeria data, I found most of the cluster had less than 5 children, 12 to 23 months. Many clusters have only one child. In this case, what would the caveats be behind the estimate? How does that affect the design effect and confidence interval? I see that for some indicators their design effects are as high as 6.
Yes, those are great questions. And I meant to, thank you, Balram, I meant to say when we were looking at the organ pipe plots that they are super useful, but I almost never make them for vaccination coverage of DHS or mix results, because in DHS and mix, they're not trying to find kids that are 12 to 23 months. They're looking for women of childbearing age between the ages of 15 and 49 is sort of, as I understand it, the eligibility criterion for the household. And so it's true that in many clusters, there are some clusters where they don't find any kids 12 to 23 months. And when they do find kids 12 to 23 months, it's usually a very small number of them. Well, those organ pipe plots are not so useful. I mean, it could be, if you have only one child in the right age, then it's going to be 0% or 100% of the kids who are vaccinated. That's not that useful. So I think they're more useful for sort of surveys that are targeted directly, where you're going to have 7, let's say, or more kids in each cluster. So in terms of caveats, so first of all, it's good descriptively to point that out, that there aren't a lot of kids per cluster. For the design effect, it actually keeps the design effect down. Having a low average number of respondents per cluster keeps the design effect down, believe it or not, despite what you're seeing there, because the design effect is definitely proportional to the average number of respondents per cluster. So all other things being equal, fewer respondents per cluster leads to a smaller design effect. But the reason you're seeing large design effects in these results is that when there is heterogeneity in the number of respondents per cluster. Some clusters have very few, some clusters have a medium number, some clusters have more. That drives the design effect up. And so that's one thing that's driving the design effects up. So the question was, what caveats? I think it's when we said at the top of the hour that one thing we do in the analysis, the first thing we do is to describe the data set. I think it's a good idea to describe sort of what the average number of, and maybe what the range was of respondents per cluster were here. And yeah, it does affect all those things analytically, but it's still a representative sample. So they went into a set of randomly selected homes, and this is every child that was 12 to 23 months in those homes. And the results are still, from a statistical standpoint, they are representative.
And that's it.
Okay, thanks, Bill. We have, all right, wait, somebody's, hang on, let me just, yeah. Okay. Some reason there's a bug in GoToTraining where occasionally someone's microphone becomes unmuted. Sorry about that. Dale, can you see the next questions? And if so, can you read them to you? Otherwise, I'm happy to Yes, this is just for people viewing the recording who won't be able to see the chat messages.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and read them? Yeah.
So yeah, so there's a question about, okay, there's a question about TechNet. So for Farah, who said when trying the link for Vicky, for the Vicky users group, there are 2 steps, and I also posted the link, the registration link. So you first need to create your account in TechNet, and I think there's some kind of manual validation of your account. So you might have to wait a few hours
A day.
or a
Yeah,
day,
that's right.
yeah,
That's right.
before, and then once your account is active, then you can use the link I initially shared to request to join, and then I'm assuming it's Dale who will be approving, or somebody from the Vicky world who will be approving.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Vicky herself, that's right. Yeah.
So Babayo Yusuf says, please, we would like to have this presentation after today's discussion because I would like to follow it up. So yes, as all the workshops have been posted in the community, we'll do exactly the same with this one. So you'll be able to find it in the community. Leave comments if you have follow-up questions, or if you'd like to share your reflections or examples, or yes, whatever the case may be.
And we'll share the PDF. The PDF of the slides is available already, or no?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So in the materials, you'll find the PDF of the slides. In the messages you receive from GoToTraining, you'll also find the link to the materials, including that PDF for Dale's slides for today. So Jaurès Churchill Rabemanantena asks or comments, the plots derive, okay, this is from the manual, page 69, and Dale, you are asked for the link because there's a claim that WHO is preparing downloadable software templates for constructing these figures. So I'm guessing these are the inchworms. The plots derive their name from the stepwise decreasing shape of it, yeah, of the shaded region, like a section of organ pipes in a concert hall.
So that's right. So that part for the organ pipe plots. So we mentioned a few minutes ago that there is a standalone program. We'll provide links to those programs and some instructions to use them to make the organ pipe plots. And then a question that came up on Survey Scholar over the weekend, or maybe it was WhatsApp, and maybe it was just privately to me, but was, hey, is there a program we can use to make inchworm plots? Because I'd like to make some inchworm plots for my Scholar project. And the answer is yes. We also, the inchworm plots, they are not specific to vaccination. They're only specific to survey-related inference about a proportion. So they could be used for lots of other, say, DHS and mix indicators. They could be used for any time where you're doing, it doesn't even have to be a survey. It just has to be a sample. When you're estimating a proportion from a sample, an inchworm plot might be relevant. And we have a standalone program for making the inchworm plots also. Although it's a bit complicated. It's not a topic for a 6-minute video because there are quite a few options and things to control. But we will issue also links to the programs for inchworm plots. You can, and there are 2 or 3 different ways to make them. So I'm not saying that it's complicated to discourage anyone. I would be flattered and happy to help you if you want to make either organ pipe plots or inchworm plots. But there's a little bit of a learning curve, and then you can really take off. So we'll provide materials for both of those types of plots.
So Dale, I'm going to read you the questions as we're running out of time. I'll give you 2 questions together. The first one is from Hassan Ibrahim, asking you or Carolina, we're currently doing entry using EPI Info version 7. What's your best advice to ensure Wiki compatibility? We'll appreciate any support, even though remotely, in seeing this part through. And then from Bo, what are your plans for the future? I'm sure this is a product in constant development. I am, as you know, a bit obsessed with illustrating data quality issues. Any idea in that direction?
What's that? Yeah, Caroline is going to take the question about the future. I'll start with the question about data entry. So EpiInfo is a great tool for data entry. I hope, you know, I always like to preach the benefits of doing double data entry, which is something EpiInfo supports, although I've never done it using EpiInfo, but that's good. And then we just have to have a step where we name your variables, we give them the same names as the ones in the Wiki manual, and where we code them the same way. So, of course, you know, around the world there are different conventions in the survey world for coding questions that have an answer of yes or no. And you could code them any way you want to. You could code yes with a 37 and no with a 62. It doesn't really matter as long as you know what's what. And so if you coded them with 67 and 32, that's fine, but we need to recode them to be consistent with the Wiki coding manual. And so we can share that manual. We can help with some instructions. We in my office, on an almost weekly basis, we write programs to convert data sets from their native format, however they were collected, to be consistent with Wiki. And Bo, I'm going to have Carolina reply to you, and then we can also obviously correspond more about this. But Carolina is going to talk about what's the future of Wiki.
Hello, everybody. I think we are doing our best so that we can continue developing Wiki in terms of not only improving it, having it in different languages, and also in expanding its use. So at the moment we are thinking of a white paper or a document that can help any household survey deal with immunization questions. So in that stream of work, I think Wiki is going to be one of the areas, so we can check, as Bo said, data quality. We can also check, availability of cards and other areas with Wiki or with any visual in Wiki, outside Wiki. So there is a line of work that we are hoping to work on in the next couple of years at least. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolina and Dale. Question from Farah Wagbo Temesaduno about how to cite the manual in a coverage survey. So is there a recommended way for a citation of the manual? Yeah, Carolina, you'll need to unmute yourself, or Dale. I'll unmute both of you, but I think there's some interference.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. Now can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
For the coverage survey manual, when the new draft will be issued this month, and it will list the suggested citation in the front. So that's a good question. I don't know that we specifically have one for the 2015 version, but we'll post one today. Carolina and I will put our heads together and we'll post what we recommend. And the citation should also include the link to the PDF. That would be good. But we'll post on the Survey Scholar today, we'll post the recommended citation for the 2015 Cluster Survey Manual. And as we've said a couple of times, there's going to be a new, just with the updates of the things we've learned since 2015, there will be a new version coming out at the end of this month or in January. And we'll make sure that you all know about that also. We also don't have recommended citations in the front of the Wiki documents. That's something that we will add maybe this week while we're together as well. Thanks for that question.
Great, thank you. So there's a comment from Bo, a follow-up comment, and then a question from Marie-Eve. I'll just read Bo's comment first. I did not mean to put you on the spot. I just wanted to hear where you're going. Personally, I never share my ideas. I might be held accountable.
If anyone is married to a wealthy billionaire, then we're always looking for more support for Wiki development. So our only limitation at the moment, as is true with much of our work, has to do with available resources. So if you are married to a wealthy and generous spouse, then we would be happy to talk about writing an application for a grant to do more work for Wiki.
All right, the question from Marie-Eve Berny is, hi Dale, in one of your PowerPoint on inchworm plots, I saw this, or put dataset info in Excel template by hand, 6 tabs, call Excel wrapper for IW plot.
Yes. That's what we'll share.
Tabs to data sets and calls, but then I've never been able to use it in Excel. Any idea how to do it?
Yes, yes, I do, and I'll share. We'll share the details about calling the inchworm plots either from the Excel template or from data sets in Stata. So yes, I know exactly what you're referring to, and we will share some materials for that in the Scholar community this week.
All right, and then Lokesh Alahari says, just thanks you, Dale. Your presentation is always so lucid. It was great to see the course team. Thank you all.
Great. fun to be here, fun to be together, and fun to be with you guys. I'm gonna miss these Monday presentations.
All right, let's give everyone some additional little bit of time to compose any thoughts or questions, or just raise your hands. But it seems like most of you are chatters rather than talkers. Okay, so from Dove, who says to avoid fewer number of respondents in a cluster, say 1 or 2 as mentioned in the previous question, you need to choose appropriately your M, the average number of respondents per cluster. It is not a matter of guessing, but you need to identify approximately its real value in close collaboration with statistical offices. This will avoid discrepancies.
That's right. So when you're planning your survey, as we talked about in Module 1, M is one of the inputs for the sample size, and if you guess one thing and then what you achieve in the field is substantially different, if it's substantially higher, that means you've wasted money doing more interviews than you needed to do to achieve the precision. And those resources might have been used elsewhere. But it means, and it will also drive up your design effect. And if it's substantially lower, then you will not achieve the precision that you planned for. And as Bo points out, that maybe you get in trouble if you promise certain precision early on, and then the field team doesn't deliver it. Then you've overcommitted. So I agree with Dove 100% that we want to use when we commit to a figure early on, then we want to work with the appropriate offices, the census or the stat office, to be sure that we're going to go to enough households in the clusters to achieve an average number of respondents per cluster that's very close to what we planned for. Very close to, or maybe just a little bit higher than what we planned for.
Okay, thank you once again. And the message from Ifeani, who thanks you all for the presentation and for the constant effort in improving vaccination. Applause from Bo. You're filling a huge gap, he says, with limited resources. I think you are leaping forward. It is not the wealthy spouse, but time as the constraint.
Well, yes, that's true. That's true. That's true. And if I had a wealthy spouse, I'd be even more distracted than I am now. So. Great. Okay, well, thanks everybody for your time. It's an honor for you to tune in and spend time with us. And we'll all be busy this week giving feedback to each other. We'll talk about it on Wednesday, but those of you who've been through this in 2 rounds already will be getting your assignments soon, I think, for the Creative Project review, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you've done and carrying on. We'll also be asking this week for your input on what topics to sort of cover. We've given the 30,000-foot overview now of the analysis process, and we're going to go back and fill in some additional details per some of the requests from today, but we'll be wanting to know soon what topics do you want to hear more detail on in the materials for next week in week 5. So thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Dale, Carolina, and John, as well as Dove and Felicity from the course team who have been with us, and I'm now going to unmute everyone, and we'll get to hear noisy offices from all over the world.
Goodbye.
Talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody. Oh, the team curse. Isn't it, Ruta?